My wife cheated on me with my younger brother while I was in Seoul, but when I hired a private investigator, I discovered Lucas was a serial scammer with 47 victims, and my parents knew everything and protected him for years. I'm 34 years old. I work in artificial intelligence in Boston, and I need to get this story off my chest because what happened a year ago basically destroyed what was left of my family, my marriage, and any illusion I had about unconditional parental love. Honestly, I guess I should start from the beginning, when I was a kid and everything revolved around my younger brother Lucas, because that's where all this shit really begins. I grew up in a home where I was basically invisible, you know, that type of invisibility that hurts more than direct abuse because at least abuse means they see you. Lucas was born when I was 8 years old, and from that moment, I ceased to exist for my parents. It's not an exaggeration. They literally stopped going to my school events, stopped asking me how I was doing, stopped everything. All the money, all the attention, all the love they had, and apparently it wasn't much to share, went to Lucas. He had the brand name clothes, the expensive toys, the elaborate birthday parties. I wore secondhand clothes, and if I wanted something, I had to get a job, which I did at 14, working at a convenience store after school. What saved me, I guess, was that I was always good at academics. Not because I had any support at home, not at all, but because it was literally my only way out. I threw myself into math and science, and by the time I was in high school, I was already publishing papers with university professors about machine learning and neural networks. I got a full scholarship to MIT, which was like winning the lottery for me, because it meant I could leave that house without depending on my parents for anything. And guess what? They didn't even go to my high school graduation because Lucas had a soccer game that same day. A 10-year-old soccer game versus my graduation. That was the choice they made. At MIT, I did amazing, honestly. I kept publishing papers, worked on important research projects, and in my third year, I got a spot in an exchange program in Seoul, South Korea. And that's where my life really began, far from my toxic family, in a country where nobody knew me and I could be whoever I wanted to be. After graduating, I didn't even come back to the United States. Well, technically, I did come back for the graduation ceremony, but my parents didn't go because, surprise, Lucas had his middle school graduation the same weekend, and obviously that was more important. So I got an incredible job at a tech company in Seoul, stayed there, and honestly, those were the happiest years of my life up to that point. It was in Seoul where I met Natalie. She was an English teacher, American too, had arrived after finishing her degree in education. She was beautiful, intelligent, funny, and seemed genuinely interested in me as a person, you know? Not in my money or what I could do for her, but in me. Or at least that's what I thought at the time. We got married after 2 years of dating. A small, intimate wedding in Seoul, because, and this shouldn't surprise anyone, my parents didn't even consider making the trip. They said it was too expensive, that Lucas was in college and they needed the money for him, all the typical excuses. It hurt, of course, but I was already used to their priorities. We lived in Seoul for 5 more years after getting married, and they were great years. My career took off. I was earning really well. Natalie had a job she loved at an international school. We had friends, a life. But then my company offered me a promotion that required me to move back to Boston, specifically to Cambridge. It was a leadership position on a super important AI project with a ridiculously high salary, like triple what I was making in Seoul. Natalie and I discussed it a lot because it meant leaving the life we'd built, but in the end she said we should do it, that it was an incredible opportunity and we could build something new in Boston. We moved like 2 years ago, bought a nice house in Cambridge. Natalie got a job as an English teacher at a local high school. And this is where things start to get really fucked up, because Lucas decided he wanted to reconnect with me. He called me one day, something he'd never done in his life, saying he'd matured, that he regretted how things had been between us, as if he'd had any fault. But whatever, that he wanted to have a real brother relationship. I was skeptical, obviously, because Lucas had always been a first-class manipulator. Throughout his entire adolescence and into his 20s, he'd been getting into trouble, scamming people, constantly lying. But my parents always defended him and gave him more money so he could find his way. But Natalie convinced me to give him a chance. She believed in redemption, in second chances, in all that pretty shit people say when they haven't lived with a sociopath. She'd tell me, "He's your brother, Jonathan. Family is important. Maybe he really has changed." And I, like an idiot, thought maybe she was right. Maybe Lucas had matured. He was like 26 at that point. Maybe it was time to leave the past behind. So we started seeing each other occasionally. We'd go out to eat. He'd come to the house sometimes. And I swear he seemed different, calmer, more responsible. He said he was working on a startup, that he was trying to get his life together. One day I came home, and Natalie had invited Lucas to dinner, without even telling me. He was sitting there in my living room like nothing, and she was cooking, all smiles. I got a bit annoyed, because she knew how complicated my relationship with him was, but I didn't want to make a scene. We had dinner, supposedly had a good time, and Lucas left. But after that, he started coming more often. Always when I was working. Natalie said he just stopped by to say hi, that he was in the area, that it wasn't a big deal. I had a bad feeling, but didn't want to be the paranoid, controlling brother. So I let it go. 3 months after we moved to Boston, my company sent me back to Seoul for a week for an important meeting with our Korean partners. It was a trip I couldn't avoid, super important for the project. I told Natalie. She said it was fine, that she'd use the time to catch up on school, work, house stuff, all normal, right? Well, turns out that week, Lucas practically moved into my house. And worse, my parents also came to visit him there, at my house, like it was a fucking family hotel. Natalie apparently invited them all, organized this whole family reunion while I was halfway around the world working. When I got back from Seoul, everything seemed normal on the surface. The house was clean, Natalie was affectionate, there were no obvious signs of anything weird. But something felt different. I don't know how to explain it, like when you know something changed but you can't pinpoint exactly what. A couple weeks later, Natalie organized a family dinner. She invited Lucas and my parents, again without really consulting me, just told me, "Oh, by the way, your family is coming to dinner Friday." And, well, I went with the flow because I was trying to be the best version of myself, the son who gives second chances, the mature older brother. The dinner was strange from the beginning. Lucas was acting weird, like possessive with Natalie, bringing her things, filling her glass, touching her shoulder when he passed behind her. My parents were more attentive to me than they'd been in years, which was suspicious in itself, and then Natalie dropped the bomb. She was pregnant. 2 months, she said, with this huge smile. And I should have been happy, right? It should have been the happiest moment of my life. But something about the way Lucas looked at her, the way my parents exchanged a look, something just didn't add up. Lucas started acting like he was the father. Not directly, but he'd make comments like, "Oh, I'm gonna be the most involved uncle ever. I'm gonna be here for everything. The baby is going to adore me." And the way he said it, with this little smirk, like he knew something I didn't know. My parents started talking about how they were going to help with the baby, how Lucas could move closer to be available, all this family planning that I'd been excluded from my whole life, and suddenly now they cared. That night I couldn't sleep. Something wasn't right, and I knew it in my bones. So the next day, while Natalie was at work, I started checking the security cameras in the house. We had cameras at the entrance, in the living room, in the yard, because I work in tech and I like security, right? But when I went to check the recordings from the week I was in Seoul, they'd been erased. All of them. Completely erased from the local system. And that's when I knew, absolutely knew, that something very bad had happened. But here's the thing. I'm a tech professional who works with AI systems and data storage, and it turns out our cameras also automatically upload to the cloud. A backup that Natalie didn't even know existed because I'd configured it and never mentioned it. So I logged into the cloud server, and there it was. Every second of that week, recorded in high definition. I'm not going to lie, what I saw destroyed me. I reviewed a whole week of recordings in fast forward, and it was exactly what my worst nightmare had imagined and worse. Lucas arrived literally hours after my plane took off. He stayed that night. And the next, and the next. A whole week living in my house, sleeping in my bed, with my wife. But it wasn't just that. They'd been planning it. talking about me like I was an obstacle, an inconvenience. In one of the recordings, Natalie was telling Lucas that I was too focused on work, that I was never emotionally present, that he made her feel alive in a way I never had. And Lucas, that son of a bitch, was saying things like, I always knew you should have been mine. Jonathan doesn't deserve you, has never deserved you. My parents arrived midweek, and it was obvious they knew exactly what was happening. My mother hugged Lucas and Natalie together, said something like, You make such a cute couple. I'm so happy to see you happy. They had dinner together like a family while I was in Seoul working. My father gave Lucas money. I heard when he told him, So you can take good care of her and the baby. The baby. My supposed baby. But they already knew. Everyone knew except me. Watching those recordings was like dying slowly for a whole week condensed into 3 hours. Every kiss, every intimate moment, every conversation about their future together, every mention of me as the idiot who was paying for everything while they planned their happy life. At one point, Natalie even laughed and said, Jonathan is so predictable. He doesn't even suspect anything. He's so into his work, he probably wouldn't even notice if I left for a month. I waited 3 days after watching the recordings. 3 days where I acted completely normal, went to work, had dinner with Natalie, talked about baby names, listened to her tell me she loved me while I knew exactly what she'd done. I needed those days to process, to plan, to not do something stupid impulsively. And then I organized my own family dinner. I invited everyone, Lucas, my parents, Natalie, obviously. I said I wanted to celebrate the pregnancy properly, that I wanted to discuss plans for the future. Everyone arrived super happy. Natalie even baked a cake. We had dinner, talked, laughed. And when we finished eating, I connected my laptop to the living room TV and pressed play. The first shots were innocent. Lucas arriving at the house, Natalie opening the door for him. Natalie said, What is this? With a nervous voice. Just keep watching, I told her. And then the recording showed what really happened after that door closed. The silence in the room was absolute. Just the sound of the video. I let it run for 10 minutes. Enough so, there was absolutely no doubt about what had happened. Lucas was pale. Natalie was crying. My parents couldn't look me in the eye. Natalie tried to explain. To say it was a mistake, that I was never there, that I was always working. Lucas the coward tried to blame me too, saying I'd emotionally abandoned my wife, that he'd only been there for her when I wasn't. And my parents, God, my parents had the audacity to say I was being dramatic, that these things happen, that I needed to forgive and move on for the sake of the baby. I told them to get out of my house. All of them. Right then. And I thought that was the end, that it couldn't get any worse. But oh, I was so wrong. But 2 weeks later, my parents sued me. They literally sued me, demanding that I give them $5,000 a month for Lucas, because he needed financial support to care for the child on the way, and $3,000 a month for Natalie for pregnancy expenses, plus $50,000 initial as startup capital so Lucas could establish an appropriate home for the baby. The lawsuit argued that as the successful, high-income brother, I had a moral and family obligation to support them. When my lawyer Angela saw the lawsuit, she literally laughed. It's the most ridiculous thing I've seen in 20 years of practice, she told me. It has absolutely no legal basis. But we still had to respond. We had to go to court. I had to sit in a room while my parents argued that I owed them money for, basically, fucking my wife while I worked. Angela put together a beautiful countersuit, divorce petition with evidence of infidelity, plus she was investigating Lucas because something smelled off to her. And this is where things get really interesting. Because it turns out Lucas wasn't just a bad brother and wife stealer, he was a professional scammer. Angela started digging into his past and found victims. So many victims. For years, Lucas had been running different types of scams. From pyramid schemes to investment fraud, fake charity scams. And my parents had been helping him, covering for him, using their own money to pay off some victims when things got too hot, moving him from city to city when the pressure was too much. Angela contacted every victim she could find and put together a massive class action lawsuit against Lucas. But wait, it gets better. When they started investigating his recent finances, they discovered that Natalie had been helping him. My wife, using her position as a teacher at a school, had gotten information from her students' parents, names, addresses, phone numbers, financial information from school applications, and had passed it to Lucas so he could execute his scams. She'd basically turned her job into a catalog of potential victims for my brother. The case went to court, and it was a spectacle. The evidence Angela presented was overwhelming. The recordings of the affair, financial records showing the money Lucas had stolen, testimonies from dozens of victims, emails between Natalie and Lucas coordinating the scams, money transfers from our joint accounts that Natalie had made to Lucas without my knowledge. The judge was visibly disgusted, especially when he heard how my parents had facilitated all of this for years. My parents tried to argue that they didn't know anything, that they were just supporting their son, that they believed in second chances. But Angela had emails, text messages, call recordings where my parents talked explicitly about how to handle Lucas's victims, how to move him to new cities when things got difficult. The judge ordered a complete criminal investigation, not just of Lucas but also of my parents for complicity. The school board found out what Natalie had done and obviously investigated her. Using student information for scams is like, I don't know, probably one of the worst crimes a teacher can commit. They fired her immediately and revoked her teaching license. She tried to argue that she didn't know what Lucas was using the information for, that she thought it was for a legitimate business, but there was clear evidence that she knew exactly what was happening. Lucas, being Lucas, decided to flee. He went to Florida, thinking he could start over there, but apparently he learned nothing because he immediately started with the same scams. It must have been the worst timing in history, because he tried to scam an undercover FBI agent who was investigating another case. They arrested him like 2 weeks after he arrived in Florida. While all this was exploding, I asked for a paternity test. I needed to know if the baby was mine. Natalie resisted, said it was mine without a doubt, that she'd only been with Lucas that 1 week, that there was no possibility it was his. But I insisted, and the judge ordered it as part of the divorce process. The results came back and, plot twist nobody expected, the baby was mine. Biologically mine. Not Lucas's. When Natalie found out that I knew the baby was mine, she completely changed her tactics. Suddenly, she was all apologies, crying, saying she'd made a terrible mistake, that she loved me, that we could fix this for the baby. Lucas also changed his tone. Showed up at my house one day with Natalie, both of them there at my door, recorded on camera because I never turned off the system after the first time, trying to extort me. If I didn't drop all the lawsuits and give them money, they were going to make my life impossible. They were going to tell my company I was an abusive husband. They were going to destroy my reputation. This whole list of threats. I sent the video of that conversation directly to Angela and the police. Attempted extortion, captured in high definition. The authorities were already investigating Lucas for the fraud, so this just added more charges. My parents, seeing that everything was falling apart, organized an intervention at their church. They invited half the religious group to talk to me about forgiveness and family. I went because Angela told me if I didn't go it could look bad in court, like I was the one avoiding reconciliation. It was surreal. Sitting there while a group of strangers told me I needed to forgive my brother and my wife. That God forgives, so I should too. That family is sacred. But then someone at the intervention, an elderly lady who'd met my parents at church, shared her own story about how Lucas had scammed her out of her life savings, saying he was investing in his startup. She'd lost $30,000, everything she had for retirement. And she wasn't the only one. Turns out Lucas had been scamming people from the church for months, using his connection with my parents as credibility. The intervention turned into chaos when more and more people started sharing how Lucas had scammed them. The divorce was finalized like 3 months ago. Natalie got nothing except her clothes and personal things. The judge was clear. The infidelity combined with her participation in Lucas's scams meant she had no right to anything we built together. Since the baby is biologically mine, I have full custody. Natalie has supervised visits every 2 weeks, and honestly, most of the time, she doesn't even show up. Lucas ended up with several years in prison for fraud, attempted extortion, and a bunch of other charges. My parents didn't go to prison, but they have to pay massive restitution to all of Lucas's victims they helped protect. They lost their house in the process, had to sell everything to pay. Now they live in a small apartment and send me messages every week asking for money, saying, I'm their only son who can help them. Now I'm their son. How convenient. That they have medical obligations. That they need help. I block them every time they get a new number. My son is 6 months old now. He's beautiful. And he's mine. Completely mine. I hired an incredible nanny who takes care of him while I work. My company was super understanding about the whole situation. They gave me flexible time, let me work from home when I needed to. People at my office don't know all the details. They just know I went through a difficult divorce and have full custody of my son. Sometimes I think about all this shit and wonder if Natalie ever really loved me, or if she was always planning this with Lucas. I think about how my parents could choose Lucas over and over and over again, even when he was destroying lives, even when he was fucking my wife, even when they were suing me for money after everything they did. I think about all the signs I ignored because I wanted to believe people could change, that families could heal. But in the end, I guess things turned out how they had to. Lucas is where he belongs. Natalie lost everything. My parents are finally facing consequences after decades of enabling Lucas's behavior. And I have my son, my job, my house, my life. It's not perfect. There are nights when I feel lonely as shit. Nights when I hear my son cry and wonder how I'm going to do this alone, how I'm going to explain all this craziness to him someday, about his mother and his uncle and his grandparents. But I'm doing it, day by day. My son smiled for the first time last week, one of those real smiles that melt your heart. And in that moment, seeing that smile, all the pain and betrayal and shit I went through, it was worth it because I have him. He's the only good thing that came out of this whole mess, and I'm going to do everything possible to give him the childhood I never had, to be the father my parents never were for me. That's enough for now, I guess.